Hi, my name is Matt, and in this video I'm going to be teaching you how to create a very basic C++ program with the help of CMake. Before we start, I just want to ask you to please visit my website, because if you are enjoying the contents of this video, I've got many posts related to software development on my website, so you might like one or two of them. But let's get straight into it. Well, firstly, I'm actually doing this tutorial on WSL on Windows. So it's basically a Linux Ubuntu distribution within Windows, but it should work if you're working with Windows or Linux or even Mac if you're using the Clang compiler. So all you're going to need installed in your machine is a working C++ compiler, such as GCC, Clang, or MSVC. And obviously you also need to install a recent version of CMake. And by recent, I mean something like 3.16 onwards. And what I'm basically trying to say is that you shouldn't really install a very old version of CMake. So let's begin. So the first thing you're going to do is let's create a dummy directory where we're going to put all of the project files. And inside the directory, we're going to need two files. Okay, we're going to need the CMake file, so the CMake lists that is necessary for CMake to be able to generate your project configurations and then be able to compile it. And obviously your C++ files where you're going to be putting all of your code. Okay, so let's do that. And as you can see here, there's now two files in my directory, one CMake lists.txt file, which is intended for CMake, and my program.cpp, which is where we're going to be putting all of the code we're going to write for the simple program. Okay. Now I'm going to be using Visual Studio Code here to do the text editing, but obviously you don't need to. You can do it in Vim, you can do it even on Notepad on Windows, and it should work, I think. So the first thing you're going to do is open the CMake lists file. And I'm hoping that you guys can read the text here. Let's just zoom in just in case. And we're going to be writing some pretty standard CMake here, so that CMake can understand your project's code structure and then be able to generate all the executables and libraries for your program. Okay, so I'm just going to type in two required lines and I'll explain what they are. So the first line here tells CMake which minimum version of CMake the user has to have in order to be able to compile this project. In my case here is 3.16. So if I try and compile this with 3.15, for example, it's not going to work. CMake is going to give you an error. The second one defines the project metadata. So for example, the very first parameter here should be the name. And then you can also add many other parameters if you want. You can look this up on Google if you want, CMake project. But one of the ones that I added is languages here, and it says C++ or CXX. This tells CMake that we're going to be writing as C++ code in our project only, okay? And then the next set of lines of CMake we're going to write are basically used to define the standard of CMake and what features your compiler should have. The very first line here sets the CMake standard. In my case here, I put 20, so C++ 20 is going to be used to compile. And this basically means that if your compiler doesn't have this standard, CMake is not going to let you proceed essentially to compile your project. The options you can have here are quite a few actually. So you see there's 98, 11, all the way to 23, which is the latest C++ standard. And the next line, CMake CXX standard required, tells CMake that if the compiler doesn't have the standard, then CMake should not let the user proceed. And this only happens if this is true. If this is false, obviously, the CMake CXX standard just becomes a hint. It says that if the user has the standard defined here, then fair enough. But if not, it's going to try and proceed to compile it anyway, or generate the project configurations anyway. The last one is a very weird one if you've not come across it. It simply just means that in this project, we're not going to be using any of the compiler-specific extensions. And this is basically to avoid you from using any of the Microsoft Visual Studio extensions, for example. That will not work in other compilers like GCC. It just makes your code a little bit more general, okay? And finally, we're going to add the one-liner that this video is all about. There's a line that is going to tell CMake how to create an executable from a given C++ file here, or a set of files. And this here simply means in CMake that we're going to be creating an executable called myprogram. And if you're running this on Windows, for example, this will be myprogram.exe. And this executable is going to be generated from this set of files here. In our case, we've only got one file, but of course you can have multiple files. For example, if you've got multiple function definitions in different files, you have to add all of the CPP files here. You don't need to add the headers though. You can if you want, but you don't have to, because CMake only cares about the definitions when compiling, and those should be your C++ files. To add headers to a library or an executable, We can talk about this in a different video, but it's a different mechanism called target include directories. So with all of this, CMake now knows how to create or how to tell your computer how to compile this my program executable, and it uses myprogram.cpp. Of course, now you actually have to go to myprogram.cpp and write the simple or sample program here. So let's do that. And this is it. This is the simplest hello world program you see in C++. And let's see if it compiles just fine. So now you can obviously go back to your terminal. And if you're inside your project directory that we created, I would recommend creating a build directory to put all the build files in. And within the build directory, we're going to call the CMake configuration command or the CMake generation command. It's simply CMake and then the path to the directory where the CMake list is located. And in our case here is one path above build. Okay, so this is my program. So let's do that. You can see generated just fine. So if you do an ls, you can see a bunch of CMake files that CMake just generates. And what you can do now is actually build a project with CMake --build and dot. And this command here simply means, you're calling CMake build, and the build files are in the path you give here, which in this case, they're all in the same directory here on the build. So you just put that and compile your program. So by default, by the way, CMake compiles all your programs and libraries inside your build directory, and it will copy the structure from your source directory, okay? So for example, we should see here on the build a file called myprogram, and if you're on Windows, this will be myprogram.exe. And you can basically just run the program because this is the program you created, the executable you created. You can see here it says hello world. Okay, and that's really it, guys. This is all you need if you're creating a very basic sort of one file executable with CMake. Just make sure that you've got all of these lines here and you understand what they are by reading the documentation. You can find documentation of all of this, by googling it. For example, CMake add executable. You can read what it does here, and I would really recommend it because it teaches you quite a lot about CMake. And I hope you enjoyed the tutorial, and also give a like and a subscribe. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.